First, let's tackle the referendum. Nigel Mills, what persuaded you that we needed to leave?
Well, I've obviously been a Eurosceptic for a long time. I think my views on immigration, how we need to control our borders, are pretty well known. I just saw that the final deal the Prime Minister got was not going to tackle that issue. It won't bring back our democracy, our sovereignty, and it won't help us grow the economy more. So I just thought leaving the EU is by far in the best interest of my constituents.
And is this a feeling that you also got from your constituents and from your constituency association?
I'm not sure about my association. I didn't seek their views, although I know there are some strong views on both sides of that. But yeah, I think the East Midlands as a whole, Amber Valley certainly has strong views on this issue. They have real concerns about immigration. You can see from European election results how strong the feeling is around here. But I had an EU referendum in my own constituency, one I held before the last election, which overwhelmingly was to come out. But I suppose we'll see when we get the final result.
We will indeed. Glenis, Willmott, why is it important for us to stay?
Oh, it's massively important to Britain and Britain's future. It's important for our economy. So many jobs and so much investment is dependent on our relationship with Europe. It's important for our security. We're safer being in the EU, whether it's climate change or security or cross-border crime. And it just seems about our place in the world. And when you talk about sovereignty, there's not much to say about sovereignty if we're actually diminishing our place in the world, which is what it would do if we came out.
Okay. How are we safe? We can't control our own borders, and we can't
we'll leave it there for that. We'll come back to this a little later if we may, Nigel. Thanks very much indeed. Well, it has been a week of politicians declaring where they stand on this issue. So how do our East Midlands politicians line up? Here's our political editor, Tony Rowe.
So who's in and who's out? Well, when it comes to Labour, all of our Labour MPs who've declared their position are for staying in. The Eurosceptic John Mann has told us he'll be announcing his decision in the future. Conservative Yes campaigners include all of our cabinet members, Nicky Morgan, Patrick McLaughlin and Anna Soubry. And former Eurosceptic Mark Spencer is also supporting the Remain campaign. Some of our Tories are undecided or haven't announced their intentions, including Amanda Soloway. She's staging her own series of debates to help her make her mind up. When it comes to the outvoters, they all come from the Conservative camp. Heather Wheeler and Andrew Bridgen have made their opposition to the EU known all along, and they've been joined by our studio guest, Nigel Mills. It's also worth noting that both of our Conservative MEPs, Emma McClarkin and Andrew Lewer, want to come out and put themselves out of a job in the process. Meanwhile, campaigning in the East Midlands steps up a gear this week. On Saturday, this Melbourne firm will host the national launch of a campaign by the Better Off Out group, focusing on the cost of the EU.
Well, there's a lot of burden of admin or needless regulations that you've got to fight through. I mean, we're involved in a lot of food labelling regulation, which seems pretty pointless. I'm sure it made sense to someone in an office in Brussels 5 years ago, but actually live now, today, in your own environment, it's just needless paperwork as far as we're concerned.
But as with politicians, there's disagreement amongst business leaders too. The bosses of Rolls-Royce and Boots this week signed a letter in support of staying in.
Tony Rowe. Nigel Mills, before I interrupted you wanted to come back on the issue of sovereignty and security.
No, I was just saying I'm not sure how it helps our security if we're in a system where we can't control who comes into our country and we can't deport people who we know are serious criminals. That's not a way of having security, that's a way of being insecure.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's a nonsense. I mean, at the moment, our border is at Calais. And if we came out of the EU, it wouldn't be at Calais anymore. Now, how that is going to help, I just don't understand.
Well,
and
we are an island, aren't we?
You are bound to be more secure if you're working and cooperating with other EU countries. You know, terrorism, cross-border crime, that isn't something we can deal with on our own. We have to cooperate with other nations. That just makes sense to me.
We have to cooperate with other nations who are outside Europe as well, but that treaty with France for Calais is a bilateral treaty, it's not an EU treaty. And the French government have said that they wouldn't seek to revoke that. But actually, it's outrageous the French let that camp be there. Anybody who is in France claiming asylum should claim asylum in France. They have no right to claim it here. Anyone that isn't an asylum seeker, again, has no right to come here. You know, it's a problem that France should have solved.
Wait a minute. The bilateral agreement you were talking about, they've spoken about that since, and if Britain had a referendum and we decide to come out, I think you'd see a very different attitude from the French. The Mayor of Calais is over in Britain all the time saying they don't like the fact that our border is in Calais. Now that's a fact.
That's not his decision, is it? And also, if that shows how much they're our friends, how much they care for our safety and security, I suggest it's a really good reason to get out of the EU.
Come on, Nigel. You've got to admit you are going to be more secure if you're going to be more secure cooperating with other countries. That is obvious.
I'm so sorry, but isn't it interesting that immigration is instantly, as soon as we start debating the EU, this is the number one subject that comes up. Is this what it's going to be like for the next 4 months?
Well, I hope not. I think immigration is a big issue on the doorstep. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, coming out of the EU isn't going to resolve that problem. What we should be doing is dealing with some of the root causes of immigration. Some of the things that agencies only recruiting abroad. Why are we allowing that as a country? Why don't we strengthen our legislation to make sure that agency workers from abroad or migrant workers from abroad can't be brought in to undercut pay and conditions? This is about bringing in low-paid workers, and it's about bad employers. That's what that's about.
Is there an issue here for you, Nigel, for those who want to leave, that your campaign will be seen as anti-immigration, Little England, a little bit right-wing?
No, I think it's very important that we don't do that. I mean, clearly, if we leave the EU, we will be able to control our borders and choose who we allow to come here and make sure people that actually come here have the right skills and experience that we need for our economy, rather than having to take every unskilled person from the EU.
The issue of the EU has got to be more than about immigration. It really has.
Absolutely. But I mean, nobody.
It's really got to be about our economy,
sensible
our
is saying
security,
no
jobs,
immigration.
rights at work.
Hopefully we will get on to that very shortly. Thank you for now. That is the politicians' view so far, but what do you think? Des Coleman's been finding out what will persuade us to vote and what issues will determine whether we say yes or no.
Hi, we are in Loughborough. It is such a glorious day. It has to be the sunniest day of the year by far. But we're here to talk to people about any issues they may have regarding the up-and-coming referendum. What issues concern you about the up-and-coming referendum?
Kind of that people don't really know enough about it. So the people that have just turned 18 and be able to vote, it's quite a complex issue to be like the first thing put to them. And so it might be good if they are told more in schools and kind of get both sides of the argument.
I think on the news yesterday about how British farming would suffer greatly if we left the EU. This morning in the Telegraph is a big article saying how British agriculture would thrive if we left the EU. So you're getting all these contradictory views all the time.
And what issues do concern you, though?
Just how it affects the economy of some university student, how that affects, the job market. That's pretty much the main thing, really.
Yeah.
I personally served in the army for 8 years and I lived in Germany. My missus is German, so I don't think coming out of the EU is something that I think is a good option.
My thoughts are really how much we're actually spending on Europe. £55 million a day, to me, is just far too much. I mean, what do we get back out of that? That's the thing.
Do you feel as though you know all the issues?
No, not at all.
Is there anything that concerns you?
Yeah, I live in Spain and I don't know what it's going to do to us as an expat in Spain.
I would hope people know all about it, because my opinion is we should come out, definitely come out, take control of our own borders, and that's it.
Some very considered views in Loughborough there on a weekday afternoon. We had someone married to a German, was afraid that she might perhaps become an immigrant if we leave the EU. We had a woman who's living in Spain, what's going to happen to her if we leave the EU. There's a sense that we are inextricably linked to the Union. Nigel Mills, it'll be a disaster if we pull out, won't it? It'll be messy.
Well, there'll have to be some detailed discussions, but I don't think it'll be a disaster. It's pretty clear that anybody who's already here will retain the right to stay here. We're not going to be throwing people out when we leave, probably in a couple of years' time. I mean, there'll be things to work out, but it's not like we don't have relations with other countries outside the EU now. I mean, lots of people come here from outside the EU, but people leave here to go outside the EU, and that happens perfectly reasonably and sensibly for them to go and work and live. There's no reason why we can't have sensible relations with the EU once we've left.
Glenis, what do you say to that?
Well,
seems reasonable.
No, the people who want to leave don't tell you what the future's going to be like. They don't tell you what leave looks like. Is it going to be like Norway, where we have to abide by all of the rules and we have to have freedom of movement and pay into the EU budget in order to trade? Is it going to be like that? What is the point? Because you don't have any say in the laws that you have to abide by. So they don't tell you what leave looks like. This is about our economy, our security. It's about jobs. It's about rights at work and rights for consumers. They don't tell you that either.
Sorry, we
tell you exactly. This is the problem. It's a lack of information. I think.
But we do say exactly that. No one is looking for the Norway option. We are a much larger economy than Norway.
What are you looking for then? Because you don't say.
The EU has a free trade arrangement with countries all around the world, including many in South America. We'd be looking for a free trade arrangement with the EU where we will let them have full access to our market.
And years. The Canadian agreement's taken 7 years. Do we want to have 7 years in flux?
It is about maintaining the existing free trade with the EU. The EU,
And who says you're going to do
EU
that?
export to us £80 billion a year more goods than we export to them. We would be wanting to have
when
that
they
relationship
when they
continue.
discuss any trade deal with us, if we come out, we will not be at the table. They will be discussing it, and we won't have a seat at the table. Should our future be determined by other people?
It will be them discussing it with us. It's how a negotiation works. That's what we will be seeking to agree.
There'll be 27 people discussing what trade deal they want, and they will be discussing 27 with us eventually when they've made a decision. We won't be part of that decision-making process.
The point I was trying to make is that there are no hard facts out there. There's suppositions.
I'll give you some hard facts. They've just agreed a deal with Ukraine, which has 98% tariff-free. That is Ukraine, a struggling country with a largely corrupt economy. We are a very major developed economy, one of their biggest customers. They export to us £80 billion a year more goods than we export to them. There is no reason why they would not want the deal. You imagine trying to tell the French farmers they couldn't sell tariff-free to UK customers. They'd be on the streets burning the place down.
You just have to look at what's happened to the pound, Nigel. Just look what's happened to the pound in recent weeks, just to the fear that we may lose. I think you should be honest with people.
I think that's a misunderstanding of the market.
Glenis,
The pound's been on the slide for a while, hasn't it?
If you don't mind, we have to move on to another topic. Fascinating as it is, genuinely. Now, one big difference between us and the rest of Europe is in attitudes to cycling in cities. On the continent, cyclists are kings of the road, but here in the UK, safe to say, it's more of a lottery. But now, one East Midlands city is being radically transformed to make it safer for cyclists. Nottingham is spending millions of pounds building new cycling superhighways. It'll mean giving over road space to cyclists and encouraging more of us to get on our bike. Rob Pittam reports.
Horrific pictures which travelled around the world. The moment when a car sped up and hit a cyclist in Nottingham city centre. It left him with severe back and internal injuries and a desire to campaign for cycling safety. Today Reg Scott is fully recovered and being shown the City Council's new super cycle highways.
Hopefully you've already had a look at it, but this is our super cycle highway. This is the route that we're creating along the west of the city to try and get more people on a bike. Segregated route, so safe.
It's a futuristic scene that's being built right now. Nottingham City Council has £6 million of government funding to spend on improving cycling. The new routes will separate cyclists from cars and help them bypass busy junctions and roundabouts.
Well, this is definitely a step in the right direction. We definitely need more space for cycling and safer environments for our cyclists. So I'm very glad that they've invested the money in this. And over the long term, investment in cycling infrastructure pays off much faster than investment in other things. And it's also a lot cheaper to do.
We want it to be the best city in the UK for cycling. Nothing short of that. We're absolutely clear that we want it to be key to the way that we develop the city. It's about health, but it's also about a nicer way to get in and out of the city. And as I say, it's also about making it also easier for cars as well as public transport users.
The super cycle highways will be built over the next 2 years. The western route is the first, but there'll also be corridors to the city centre from the north, south and east. There'll be improvements too to existing cycle paths and tracks. But with a whole lane being taken out here for cyclists to use, where does that leave car drivers?
In a way, this is pro-car, because if you get people using other forms of transport, if you get people onto trams, if you get people onto bikes, ultimately that reduces the number of cars on the road, and it means that people who do need their cars can do so in a nicer environment. So I don't see this as a choice between prioritising cars or prioritising other forms of transport. It's actually about making the whole system work, and importantly it's about making it safe for everybody, and particularly safe for cyclists who quite often encounter dangerous situations.
Work begins on the southern cycle route next month. The hope is that more of us will choose cycling to get into the city, and there'll be fewer incidents like this.
Well, we're joined by Hugh McClintock from Pedals, the Nottingham Cycling Campaign Group. Hugh, I must declare an interest. I think one of these super cycle highways is going to go right past my house. But it must be good news from your point of view.
Yes, it's certainly very good news, because a lot of the cycle infrastructure in Nottingham is old and fairly substandard. This is a great chance to get improved provision for cyclists. We need a lot more of that to get people out on their bikes.
Not such good news for motorists, who are, after all, in the majority. I mean, we're talking about taking road space from cars and giving it to cyclists. The roads are already congested, aren't they?
You've got to look at the wider picture in terms of the health benefits, the enormous public and individual health benefits, getting more people on their bikes, and also the major contribution that cycling play in helping to reduce congestion and also bad problems of air pollution. And we now know that's a very serious public health problem. Cycling has a vital role there. Yes, okay, quite a lot of car traffic will still be necessary, but let's get far more people using their bikes for shorter trips where cars are not necessary.
In a nutshell, any sympathy with motorists in Nottingham and indeed other cities who feel they're being squeezed out?
I can understand that, but the point is to encourage motorists to think much more carefully about when they use their cars, when they can use bikes or need public transport for other trips, not to ban cars altogether. And that's the vital thing. Good quality cycle infrastructure can help people to do that, give them real encouragement.
Nigel, do you instinctively err on the side of the car driver, or are you a green Tory? Where do you stand on this?
Oh, I remember.
Of course, all Tories are green.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember cycling to university many years ago, so I've done a fair share of cycling around big cities. I mean, I think it's right that we have safe cycling infrastructures. People who want to cycle, and we hope that more of them can do that safely without those awful accidents we've just seen. But I think it's important to make sure that the roads move freely as well. People can get in and out of the city for work and leisure. Otherwise, you really start damaging your own economy. So I think we have to get it right. But it sounds like a sensible idea to have these superhighways.
Glenis, you spend a lot of time in Europe. You must have seen the huge army of cyclists over there. Do they do things better over the Channel?
I think cyclists get a much better deal, to be honest, if you look in Brussels, Amsterdam, all those places. But, you know, cycling, the number of cyclists has increased dramatically. I think it's by 33% in the last few years. And we have to make sure that they have the facilities they need to cycle safely. And that's good for them, but it's also good for motorists. It also is good for climate change and the environment. So I think it's a really positive thing. And I think I welcome Nottingham City's what they're doing on this. I think it's brilliant.
Hugh, is the government doing enough? Are they paying lip service to cyclists?
Well, this investment in Nottingham is certainly very welcome, but we want to see it sustained because there's lots of other areas of Nottingham where cycling infrastructure is still quite poor and needs to be upgraded. We want to see further links, including a new cycle pedestrian bridge across the Trent as part of the network. That's common in many other cities. That would be a really useful benefit to the wider cycle infrastructure. So investment does need to be sustained over many years, and it's also very important to get the details right. You can have good schemes, but they need to be carefully implemented to make sure the details are right to attract a lot more people to cycling. And if you do that, cycling will help a lot towards the overall quality of life in cities. Cities less dominated by traffic and pollution that contributes to the quality of life for everybody. And that's a key lesson from other European countries as well.
Nigel, is your government, has it become less green certainly since the last election? I'm talking about solar subsidies, things of that nature.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I would say that funding for cycling, I think, is now 4 times higher than it was in 2010. So then there's £300 million in for cycling at this Parliament. So there's a lot of money there to try and support cycling. The issue on solar subsidies effectively was that the cost of solar panels have actually come down dramatically. The idea is you get a return of 5% for having solar panels, and as the costs come down, the investment needs to go down as well. But if you look at things like wind farms, and there's been huge amounts spent in subsidising those. We've met the targets, the money's been spent, it's right those subsidies end now.
Glenis, do you think that really Europe or the European Union can take a lot of the credit for the sort of initiatives that we're seeing in Nottingham and other cities, the greening of our cities? Would this be happening? Would it be being driven through were it not for Brussels?
Well, I think we have a big part to play in Brussels because if you look at the tram, there was a lot of money put in to the tram network by Brussels, by the European funding, and I think that's all very good, and it makes sure that it's a cleaner city. That's got to be good for everybody. It's good for the people who live there and the people who work there, and it's good for the environment. So I think it's a win-win situation.
Nigel, the government could always do more, I'm sure. I mean, I understand they've been cutting back on some cycling schemes. Money is tight. We're being told this everywhere, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. We're still going to try and find 30 billion worth of savings this Parliament to balance the budget. But it's worth saying, when we talk about Europe investing money, we do send to Brussels £10 billion a year more than we get back.
Cycling,
so we can choose to invest that.
This is about cycling.
You said European money.
It seems to be. Well, it was
You said European money paid for time. It was our money that we sent them. They spend a lot less here than we send them. That is just a fact. We can spend
if you're going to
more
talk
money
about
on these schemes.
Let's be honest. Every household is £3,000 net
on,
better off a year.
Nonsense number, that
the
one.
last word to Hugh is
Quite right.
Apart from the wrangling over Europe, from what you've heard, are you encouraged that cycling may continue to be supported in the way that you hope it will be?
Well, I think there's a good chance because I think there's much more appreciation now of the major benefits that increased cycling can play, particularly in terms of health, and that certainly will help the case for it being taken more strongly in the long run.
Hugh, I know you've brought your bike in today to join us. Thank you very much indeed for coming and talking to us.